Perspective colors, influences, and to some extent creates all our experiences. How we choose to view our lives depends a lot on our perspective. Travel opens us up to new perspectives that often force positive or even negative changes in our views. Travel is a great way to challenge everything you think you already know. With this in mind, I've set out to answer three questions. How can studying non-human primates help us better understand ourselves? How did traveling in a developing country while dealing with an illness change my perspective? How can learning about other cultures alter the way we react to perceived crises? I don't know if it was culture shock or just plain shock, but my life had suddenly turned upside down. I was lying under mosquito netting in a dark room. I had just used a bathroom filled with mosquitoes and a toilet that refused to flush. None of my group mates were staying at this hostel, and the Wi-Fi was broken, so I had no way of getting in touch with them or contacting my parents and letting them know I had arrived safely in Rwanda. That night, I did not sleep at all. Instead, I spent the night worrying about what the hell I had gotten myself into. The next day, I sat around the hostel, a little bit stunned and trying to figure out the Wi-Fi. One of the staff came by and said, "You came to see Rwanda, and all you're seeing is your tablet? Go outside and check out Umuganda." Feeling guilty and frazzled, I went out to take a walk. Umuganda is a day of Rwandan service that happens on the last Saturday of every month. On that day, everyone performs some sort of community service, and then the community has a conversation. A boy selling postcards met me outside my hostel door and offered to walk me around the city. He asked me about American culture, and I asked him about Rwandan culture. He showed me his home, which was a metal roof held up by four sticks. He made his living by selling postcards and rarely had enough to eat. This is not an isolated case. Many young Rwandans were living in abject poverty. I'd always known I was privileged, but now I was confronting the fact head on. Yet despite the fact that this man had nothing, he spent valuable time showing me around his country. In the face of all I learned on the first day, my feelings of shock the night before no longer felt justified. A few days later, the program started. We made two important visits before we left for Akagera National Park, an orphanage called Les Enfants de Dieu and the Genocide Museum. The boys at the home asked questions, requested pictures, and clamored for us to play various games with them. I played volleyball with a few of the boys who were graciously tolerant of my lack of athletic ability. The next day we went to the Genocide Museum. It was a very painful experience. The violence that people witnessed, committed, and lost their families to is simply unimaginable. Incredibly, the Rwandan people have managed to move forward from something so horrible, and despite their violent history, we're moving towards a better future together. Soon we left for Akagera National Park. Unfortunately, I developed a very bad cold. I had a sore throat, a runny nose, and a stuffed nose, and a cough. The whole 9 yards. One of my worst fears had come true. I was ill and camping in the middle of nowhere. Even worse, if my illness didn't clear up quickly, I wouldn't be able to see the gorillas. And seeing the gorillas was the main reason I had traveled over 9,000 miles. I wasn't able to join the group for the first few days of baboon observations, and I spent my time going back and forth between worrying about my illness and being grateful that I only had a cold. I thought about how lucky I was to have a wonderful family and a good education. If the Rwandan people could deal with all their troubles, then I could deal with a cold. After we left Akagera, my cold started getting better. Now, however, I had a cough that wouldn't quit. After a day in Kigali, we went to Nyungwe Forest. During our time there, we spent many hours observing baboons. I loved watching the baboons because they were like humans who lacked all impulse control. A few baboons particularly caught my attention. One was a cranky female in estrus that enjoyed nothing more than scaring my group mates. This baboon was known for throwing an infant off a cliff, and don't worry, the infant was fine, but still a nasty act, and attempting to assault humans. On the other side of the baboon spectrum were two adult brothers that took it upon themselves to protect the infants from these ridiculously violent females. To my surprise, my illness turned out to be a blessing in disguise. While we were in Nyungwe, we weren't in the best living conditions. Yet I found the things that would usually bother me. Poor showers. I even had hot water explode from the hose and spray into my eyes. Bad food. A lot of us spent a lot of time in the bathroom, and sporadic Wi-Fi didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. I was too worried about not seeing gorillas to be bothered by anything else. Plus, I felt a lot better than I did in Akagera, so I was grateful for that. We saw the largest amount of biodiversity in Nyungwe. In Nyungwe, we observed vervets, Loiste's monkey, black and white colobus, and most importantly, chimpanzees. The chimpanzee hike was a very difficult day, to say the least. I stumbled out of bed at 4 a.m. that morning. Then we hopped on the bus for a nausea-inducing 3-hour ride filled with hairpin turns and endless switchbacks. We arrived at the park bedraggled and exhausted, the perfect condition for beginning a hike at 6,000 feet in altitude, a hike filled with vertical slopes and hours of heavy bushwhacking. I was about ready to drop from overexertion when we arrived at the chimpanzee's habitat. It was an odd thing to be so close to one of humanity's closest relatives. Chimpanzees have a nasty reputation, being known as one of the only non-human animals that engage in warfare. Like a lot of other animals, they also partake in infanticide. However, these chimps were not really living up to their violent reputation. If anything, they seemed like any other arboreal primate. They mostly sat around and ate fruit, groomed each other, and rested. Despite being touted as one of the most intelligent creatures, they weren't engaged in complicated behaviors at all that day. Instead, they were behaving like a group of humans enjoying a relaxing weekend at a wilderness resort. I found myself wondering whether humans are not so different from other primates. Could it be our vanity or insecurity, or simply our need to feel special that leads us to constantly note the differences between ourselves and other animals rather than the similarities? Although all my other symptoms had cleared up, my cough stubbornly continued, so I made an appointment with the Belgian embassy doctor in Kigali. Anate, a 23-year-old Rwandan woman who had become my friend, accompanied me to the doctor to serve as my interpreter. In order to get to the doctor's, we hopped on a couple of motor taxis, which are a lot of fun. When we finally arrived at the doctor's, I was convinced that he would tell me I had some horrible disease. He ran a few tests and informed me I only had allergies. I would get to see the gorillas, and I was stoked. That had come out of this trip was my friendship with Anate. During my time in Rwanda, she and I became very close. She helped me when I first got sick, and I returned the favor when she wasn't feeling well. We had lots of conversations about America and Rwanda. You can read a lot about a country, but you don't really understand very much until you talk to the people. Thanks to our friendship, I was better able to gain a working knowledge of Rwandan society. Our conversations also made me think about American society and what works and what doesn't. Anate wasn't the only person to offer me a fresh perspective on the world. My fellow classmates all came from radically different backgrounds. Each person, including me, had something new to bring to the table. If I had not gone on this trip, I might not have met any of these people or had the opportunity to add their perspectives to my own. The mountainous hikes to the gorilla's rainforest habitat were very difficult, but as I hiked, I kept thinking about how lucky I was to see them. This may not be a very scientific observation, but I can tell you that gorillas are pretty inspiring beings. I enjoyed how peaceful they were, especially compared to the baboons. They spent most of their days eating, playing, they make a little laughing noise, which is very cute when they play, and snuggling with each other. Again, this may not be very scientific, but I felt as though our fellow primates were pointing the way towards more peaceful possibilities for humans. Like the people of Rwanda, these gorillas had experienced existential dangers, but they too had survived. I will always remember their gentle behavior. Perspective? Well, I can definitely say that a hostel with poor amenities would no longer shock me. I'm also more aware than ever how fortunate I am. I met many people like my friend Anate, who had lost their entire families during the genocide, and who would give anything to belong to a family like mine. I saw how resilient people and non-human animals can be, how they can heal and move on from horror, tragedy, and loss. Despite everything, the Rwandan people are saving the endangered gorillas. In return, the gorillas are saving the Rwandan people by helping them establish a national identity and rallying point, and by attracting much-needed tourist dollars. From that perspective, a bad cold while visiting a developing country isn't such a frightening prospect.